Into week 14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I'd look to get on the wire this week. The first guy, Deontay Harris of the New Orleans Saints. Harris, he had a great long touchdown in that ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. I know it's garbage time for a 70-yarder, but the speed this guy has, once he hits that second level, he is gone. So in the last few games here for Harris, some ups and downs. Week 10 at Tennessee, a carry for 6 yards, 3 catches, 8 yards, and a fumble loss. Week 11 at Philly, 2 catches, 11 yards. Week 12 versus Buffalo, a catch for 9 yards. And Week 13 versus the Boys, a carry, 3 rushing yards, 4 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown. So Week 14, Harris has a great matchup at the New York Jets that give up the 16th most fantasy points to receivers. We saw the Eagles with backup quarterback Minshew go up and down the field here versus them. And I think with Harris's speed, he could have a good one versus the New York Jets. And he's available in 84% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver is Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons. So I'm not big on Russell Gage. After a few games this season, he's burned me with no fantasy points at all and 2 goose eggs. But right here, there's no denying he's been having some good games of late here, is Gage, and is one of the favorite targets of Matt Ryan ever since Calvin Ridley has been off. So Week 11 versus New England, 5 catches, 49 yards. Week 12 at the Jags, 6 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown. And a big ball game for him in Week 13 versus Tampa Bay, 11 catches, 130 yards, a fumble loss on 12 targets, so a great ratio catch to targets there. And Week 14, he's got a mediocre matchup at the Carolina Panthers that give up the 5th least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers, but he's the number one, it looks like, over there in Atlanta. He could go either way, though, in my opinion, Gage. He could have a monster game or a bad game like he's had early in the season. But versus Carolina, I think he has a decent one. And right now, he's available widely as well in 66% of fantasy leagues. The next receiver is Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So the Lions see a lot of wide receivers this season that have been inconsistent, one good game and then disappear. But Amon St. Brown looks like he might be the number one guy over there. And Josh Reynolds has been playing pretty decent as well. So the last few weeks here for St. Brown. Week 11 at Cleveland, 4 catches, 18 yards. Week 12 versus the Bears, 4 catches, 23 yards. And then Week 13, a monster ball game versus Minnesota. 1 carry, 2 rush yards, but 10 catches, 86 yards, and the game-winning walk-off touchdown versus the Vikings to get the first win of the season there for Detroit. So right now, he's available in tons of fantasy leagues at 94%. And right here, you don't have the greatest of matchups in Week 14 at Denver. But right here, if they're going to be trailing, obviously, someone's going to have to catch the football. And the 2 candidates right here for Detroit's obviously St. Brown and Josh Reynolds right now with the 2 guys. So as a guy to have on your bench, or if you're in a deep pinch, even though I know this is it here, the final week of the regular season in most fantasy leagues, you got to go with St. Brown. Then that's pretty tough in my opinion. But a guy to add depth to your roster and be on the back end of your bench, he's a good pickup this week on the waiver wire. The next wide receiver is Jakeem Grant of the Chicago Bears. So the Bears, they've used Grant's speed over the last few weeks here, and he's looked pretty good. He was pretty decent on the Dolphins, I thought, ups and downs over the last few seasons, but the last few weeks he's been playing more now for the Chicago team since they got him in a trade. So Week 11 versus Baltimore, 1 carry, 11 yards, a catch, 6 yards. Week 12 at Detroit, 2 catches, 25 yards, and 4 rushing yards. And then Week 13 versus Arizona, a solid game, 5 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown. So Week 14, it's going to be a lot of throwing once again for this bad team. And if Andy Dalton's going to be the starter once again, he's going to air it out. Grant's going to get many opportunities. He just fits more, in my opinion, in this offense with the traditional quarterback in Dalton, even though he had a bad ball game, obviously, with 4 interceptions. But right now, Grant's available in 100% of fantasy leagues. So in deeper leagues, if you need receiver depth or you're so desperate for a guy to start in your lineup, I would give Grant a shot, especially if Dalton is going to remain the starter next week. And the 5th and final wide receiver is KJ Osborne of the Minnesota Vikings. So Osborne, he's had his moments this season with some decent fantasy value, decent fantasy games as Osborne. And now Adam Thielen left the Week 13 ball game with an ankle injury, and he came through with a good game as Osborne. 4 catches, 47 yards, and a touchdown. So right now, as long as Thielen's going to be out or miss time, he's worth the waiver wire pickup here as Osborne. Available in 97% of fantasy leagues. Because the last few weeks with Thielen in the lineup, he didn't do much. Week 11 versus Green Bay, a catch, 19 yards. And Week 12 at San Francisco, a catch, 5 yards. Early in the season, we saw flashes where he had 3 double-digit fantasy games in the first 6 games of the season. But he's been a guy that's been phased out of the offense. But now, like I mentioned, if Thielen's out, he's definitely a good pickup this week. So that's a few wide receivers I'd look to get on the waiver wire for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.